everyone, it's Lisa from My Dreaming Soap. Welcome to my channel. In this video we're going to have a look at making a hanger swirl. So what I've got on my table here is a selection of things that you can use to make a hanger. Now you can actually buy hanger tools, proper ones, from soap making suppliers. That's if you're somewhere like the US, something like that. They're not so easy to find other places like in the UK, so you can be limited to making them yourselves. And I think that's a good thing because you can get them far cheaper than if you try and buy one. So what have I got here? This is a very popular option. This is called a gear tie, and you can get these in packs from places like Amazon, and they're really cheap. They can work out a couple of £1 for them. And the good thing is they're pretty stiff, so they're not going to bend and, you know, and they are going to move your soap around, but you can actually just make them fit your mould specifically. Okay, so nice and cheap, nice and easy to use, nice and easy to clean, safe in your soap, really good option. If you want to go super cheap, and if you can find them, they're difficult to find nowadays, you can actually use a proper hanger. This is a old wire coat hanger that I've just taken apart. And obviously this was pretty well free because it was just out of my cupboard. This gives a very thin hanger. And what I actually do is I've got this bit of plastic that I use sometimes, and I slot it over this hanger to actually make it slightly thicker. But this is a freebie option, so this is great. But obviously you need to make sure that you can find one of these because everything seems to be plastic hangers nowadays. And then lastly, this sort of more official looking thing. This is a hanger tool that I made myself. I bought some stainless steel rod, and I actually got it in a couple of sizes, and I just got it from eBay. Some stainless steel rod, and then I bent it to shape to give me a nice rigid hanger tool. It is lovely and rigid, it's a nice tool, but obviously the problem with it is it's only ever going to fit in the mould that I actually made it for. Okay, so there are lots of options, from super cheap or free to, you know, if you go and buy one. I've never bought one from a soap supplier. I've just not had access to them and never felt the need to. Okay, so those are our tools. So while we're waiting for our oil and lye solutions to cool down, let's work out our colours. So we know in total we are using 1000 grams of oil in our recipe. Now you can split that off however you like. I'm going to have half of it as my base colour, so that would be 500 grams of the oil, and then I'm going to be using neon purple, purple passion, and ooh la la. So two different types of purple, and then sort of quite a deep pinky red with mine. So that's going to be the other half. Now half divided by 3, that's a bit messy to deal with, so let's do that. That's 50%, isn't it? 50 divided by 3, so 16.6 or 17% each. Now you don't have to be as picky as that. You could say, well, I'm going to do 20, 20, 20 and then leave that as 40%. Whatever you want to do. So I'm going to have ooh la la, purple passion, I'm just going to call that purple P, and then neon purple. Okay, and so for each of those, I'm going to have 500 divided by 3. That will be that 167 grams of oil. Now we know we're never going to measure out those individual amounts, but it's just useful, isn't it, to help us work out how many colours we need. And I'm sure I'll say this in all the other videos, is if you don't want to accurately measure your colours, once you're roughly used to how much you need, so you get used to safe rates and that sort of stuff, you can just put bits in and mix it in with your soap and see what it looks like. That's okay. But certainly to start off with, you need to have some sort of ballpark idea of how much you should be even putting in. I like to always measure, because I know if I know what colour and how much I used, and then I can see the result that I got, I know then that I can replicate that. Or if I didn't like it, I can change it. Whereas if you just popped in a random amount, every time you're guessing every single time. Okay, so with my base is going to be titanium dioxide, and I just use all these at 0.6% of oil, so 500 grams times 0. So I want 3 grams for my TD, and then this 167. Okay, so these are all going to be 1 gram, so that's nice and easy, isn't it? 1 gram of the colourant to use. So my base, I'm going to leave that as titanium dioxide, and I'm going to mix that into the pot that I'm mixing up my soap in. Then the other 3, let's put these colours straight into the jugs we're going to use. Okay, so 3 jugs, and I'm just going to weigh off 1 gram of each of those. Okay, so those are my dry colours. Now my neon purple, I've already pre-dispersed that, because neons are really tricky. Okay, so those are our colourants measured out. Let's take a little bit of our base oils and add it to the colours that are not yet mixed with oil. And let's give those a good old mix in. If you're not getting into pre-dispersing, and to be honest, if you don't use pigments very often, I wouldn't worry too much about pre-dispersing them, just mix them as you go. You can do exactly the same as this, but you need to really smush them around in the jug to make sure they're properly mixed. Okay, so I'm happy there with my colours. I will measure my TD when I actually need it. Then the other thing we want to get ready is our fragrance oil. Now I'm using a lilac fragrance oil for this one. Now this lilac fragrance is unusual for a floral because it's a really slow moving fragrance oil. Now you don't need something super slow for a hanger swirl, because you don't actually want to pour your soap when it's too thin. But you definitely don't want something that's going to speed up and thicken your soap batter really quickly. Okay, so something that's slow is good, but it doesn't have to be really slow. Okay, so we've got everything ready now. Okay, our lye and our oils have cooled down nicely, so let's get these blended up together. Okay, just remember, pouring over a spatula just helps drop that lye into your oils without creating extra bubbles. And we want nice smooth soaps, don't we? Now when you split yours off, you can just eyeball it and pour a bit off. I'm just going to weigh this and then do the split now. Now, advantages obviously of weighing it is you'll get your colours even. Now that doesn't really matter in something like a hanger swirl, but what does matter is if you've gone to the fact of carefully weighing out your mica so you know what you've done in your soap, it seems silly to then put the wrong amount of soap in each one. So let's just tear out my soap. Now what I've done is I'm weighing this as soon as I put everything together, so I haven't blended it in yet and I'm not too worried about it thickening up. So remember, with my weights, I can see that is in total, my soap weight is 1511. I know that my jug weighs 110 grams. So I've got 1401 of soap. So I know I want to split that, don't I? I want my split, I'm just going to call that 1400. I want 700 to go to the base, so that's half of it. And then of the other half, 700, I want to divide that by 3. That'll be 233 grams poured out for each of those. And let's just do that little check. 700 plus 233 plus 233 plus 233, 1399. Pretty close, isn't it? That's perfect. We've done our maths correctly. Okay, so we're all now prepared. Let's get this blended up then. So in with our stick blender on a bit of an angle. Give it a nice bash around, but that stick blender to get those bubbles out. If you see any bubbles come to the top, try and get rid of them. Okay, the less bubbles you can have, the smoother your soap will be. It will just look more beautiful. Right. Oh, that's really high. And low. Okay, so I've taken this to a nice light trace. I could just see my trace on the soap. Let me just clear this off and I'll show you. Okay, can you see there's a definite trace? I'm not sure how well you see that. So I'm happy that that's nicely traced. I'm going to now weigh these bits out. I'm just going to do that off screen. I'm literally going to put 233 grams in each of these and then come back when they're weighed out, just because I've plugged my scale back in over there now. I've divided my colours out and I've just now got to add my titanium dioxide to my big pot. So I wanted 3 grams of titanium dioxide. So I'm using it as its dispersed rate. Let's get these mixed in. Now I've got a different spatula in each pot. You don't need to do that. You can wipe your spatula in between, or if you just go, you know, if you've got similar colours like this, you just wipe it on the side of the jug and move it from one to another. That's going to be absolutely fine. You're not going to get much colour transfer. Now let's get our fragrance oil split out. Again, you could measure it accurately, but this is just a hanger swirl. Everything is going to be mixed together, so we don't need to worry too much. Most of it is going in there, or half of it is going in with my TD. And do try to put it in and then mix it straight in. Don't just let it sit in a blob in your soap. Okay, then it's divided between the others. Okay, and then remember, really always really mix your fragrance oil in thoroughly. Now with a hanger swirl, you can get away with various different textures. If you've got a very thin trace like I've got here, you're going to end up with much more wispy swirls. And also, it's probably a good idea to use a thicker style hanger tool if you've got some to choose from. Because if you've got a very thin batter, which moves very easily, and you use a very thin hanger through it, it's probably not going to drag much soap around at all, and you'll get very little design. So therefore you'll possibly want to go for a thicker hanger tool. Once your batter gets a little slightly thicker to, you know, my trace is starting to come now, then you've got the choice. Do I want to use a bigger hanger and that'll give more movement, or do I want to use this skinny hanger, which will give much more wispy swirls, and that's for you to have fun with and play around with and see what you like doing. Once your soap batter gets thick, again you're basically down to, you're going to need a bigger hanger to move that thicker soap, because if you use the thin hanger tool, it's just going to go through the soap rather than actually moving it. Okay, so a thicker one is always a safer bet if you're unsure, rather than a thinner one. But play around and see what you like. Let's get our mould. A good old trusty mould. Now what I'm going to do is put quite a bit of this base in the bottom, and you don't have to do this, you can pour it in any way you like. You might just want your colours all the way through, you might want even colours and just put them all in and then swirl them and see what you come up with. You know, that's the fun thing with swirls, is you can change your proportions, you can change your colours, you can change the way you swirl. There's so many different ways you can do this, and you can get some real art in how you do it and a technique that you like. So, you know, these are endless. It's not a case of, oh, I've done a hanger swirl, that's it. All the colours, all the different swirls, whether you use a thick hanger, how thick your batter is, how you put it in the mould. There's so many variations. Right, let's get this in. So I'm going to put quite a nice lot in the mould. And I want to end up with, I'm just trying to see on the side of my jug, about the same amount of this white left as I have with the other colours. So I've got about 200 grams of each of those is showing. Okay. And again, how you pour this in the mould, whether you do thin lines like I'm doing, or you might do thicker blocks of colour, they will all give you a different look in your final soap. Okay, so I'm just doing these thin lines, and can you see I'm sort of pouring it next to the colour that I've done rather than on top of. Try and make sure you go right up to the edges so that none of those end bars end up being all rubbish. Okay, so this will give a very sort of wispy design, not wispy, but a design where we've not got big blocks of colour. Okay, and if you want big blocks of colour dragged around, then put more in each place. And the difference to this to a drop swirl is I'm not trying to get it to drop through the soap. Okay, my batter's thickening a little, but that's okay because a hanger swirl, I don't want my batter really, really thin. I don't want to muck around though and get it really thick so it doesn't pour. You may even find some colours thicken up quicker than others. See, this purple has definitely been quite a bit thicker than the other ones. I'm just going to get that in now. Now I'm not going to scrape these jugs out fully because I do want to leave some just to finish off the top nicely. But remember, you only need a tiny bit, so do give the jugs quite a good scrape, because you only need a very small amount for the top, because it ruins the top if you put too much soap on the top. Okay, so can you see that? Okay, hardly leaving any in there at all. Right, let's give this a little tap. Now I'm going to go for the thinner hanger with mine, just because my batteries are a good thickness, but it's not too thick. And what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to go down into my soap, and then I'm going to go across the bottom in a figure of 8, and I'm going to gradually come up through the soap doing some figures of 8. Okay, once I've done that, I'm going to go down and then maybe I'm going up and down figures of 8. Now, you do need to be careful that you don't over swirl. It can be quite hard to tell how much to swirl, but again, if you can try and remember what you've done, you know, if you actually think about a pattern that you've done, rather than just going, oh, I'm just going to swirl, then you'll know for next time. Okay, and then I'm just going to finish off with just maybe going round and round. Can you see how that hanger does drag those colours? I think that's going to do, that's going to be plenty. Put that on the top. Okay. Let's get that top finished off then by just scraping off these bits in the jug. I've got one final scrape of the white. I quite like to see some white towards the top, so even though I scraped it on first, I like to have a few bits left over just to break up the darkness on the top. Okay, now the other fun packed bit is having a swirl on the top. Nice tap down. And remember, this is just let your imagination go. Think about anything you want to do with your tops. So I'm going to, this time, I'm going to go sort of side to side first of all. Don't go down too deep because you don't want to affect the inside of your soap. Okay, so that looks quite pretty on its own, doesn't it? But I want it a little bit, it's sort of almost looks a bit formal to me. I do want it to have a bit more of a swiggle to it, so I am just going to go and do some little squiggles like this. Okay, so there we are. That can now go and sit away until tomorrow when we can cut it. Let's unmould and cut our hanger swirl soap then. So let's pop it out of its box. . 'Cause 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 'c can see there it's peeled off nicely, so we know that's ready to come out of the mould. Okay, so there we are. Remember, if we're going to bevel our soap, it's always a good idea to just bevel off these top edges first, just because it's then less beveling you have to do when you actually get into the soap and have it in individual bars. Okay, so there's those taken off. And let's just pop those away. Okay, and now we can just go through and mark our bar of soap. I'm doing mine every 2.5 centimetres, just because that's pretty standard. 2.5 centimetres or an inch, pretty well the same sort of thing. And I do tend to mark mine both sides. If I'm cutting with my wire cutter, then I don't bother. But if I'm cutting with a knife, then you're going to find by doing it both sides, you can then get your knife nice and straight on your soap. Okay, so let's have a look at what we've got. Just pushing straight down with our knife. And there we go. Look how pretty that's come out. I think that's beautiful. Just remember, those were those 3 colours we had, and this was a 50/50 mix, wasn't it? So again, you can choose whether you want more colour with that, less colour than that, but if you know where you're starting, then you can make changes. I think that's really pretty, and I like the way we've got the more white at the bottom. The swirl, I swirled quite a lot, but if you remember, I used that thin hanger tool, which gave me these very thin swirls going through. Okay, so let's try another one. Well, let's try them all, shall we? That's wonky. Okay. Okay, if I have to twist off your knife. They're really pretty, aren't they? And as I said, with all of these swirls, whether it's your hanger swirl or your drop swirl, you can try so many different things, you know, to alter up the amount of soap that you colour. With a hanger swirl, change the way you do your hanger. But one of the things I would always advise when you're doing it is make some notes of what you did, so that if you want to, you can do it again, or if it's something you didn't like, you can change it and not make that mistake again. Okay, and our last one. There we are. think they're really pretty. They've come out beautifully, haven't they? Mine are a little bit different. My ones at the end are a bit bigger because normally I would cut off a little slice at the end, but I haven't done that for these soaps when I'm cutting them by hand because my hand cutting is not that good. But there we go. I really like them. I hope you do too. And obviously you can have so much wonderful fun with doing all our hanger swirls.